Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular monthly FPAC meeting. I'm Trustee Zakir Patel. We have Vice Chair Matthias. We have Dan McLean present. Trustees who are on FPAC committee, can you please identify yourself? Thank you.
Shelley Laskin's here online.
Thank you, Shelley.
Michelle Art's here online.
Michelle is here. Anyone else? Do we have a quorum? Good, thank you. I would like to call today's FPAC meeting to order with our land acknowledgement, and if everybody can rise, thank you. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Thank you. You can be seated. I need an approval. I need a more than a seconder to approve today's agenda. Approved by Matthias. Seconder, please. Dan McLean. Thank you, Dan. Item number 3, declaration of possible conflict of interest. If there is any, please declare now.
Mr. Chair, can you vote on the approval of the agenda? Thank you.
Thank you for reminder, Denise. Can we open the vote? Are we voting on agenda?
By hand, a show of hands.
By hand?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Or 8.
Laskin, aye.
Art's aye.
That is carried.
And it's carried. Item number 3, declaration of possible conflict of interest. Any trustees? Hearing and seeing none. Item number 4, delegations. And I believe we have 1 delegation. Am I right? Thank you.
That's correct.
Thank you. Usa, you can be seated. You have 5 minutes,
Yes.
and your time starts now. So thank you.
Okay. Last year, the TDSB moved to create equitable access to specialized programs by implementing a lottery system. While I applaud this action, the board must recognize that true access to specialized programming goes beyond simple registration in a school. It requires that the board ensure that students' families are not required to fund the programs out of their pockets. Thus, it is critical that the TDSB review the funding of specialized schools. In particular, the Etobicoke School of the Arts receives no additional funding to support the myriad of art programs it offers. Thus, the school has been funding the arts by leaning on parents to fundraise, charging students admission fees to performances, requiring students to sell products like chocolates in order to participate in shows, expecting students to provide some of the art supplies they need for their projects, and underfunding academic subjects like science. However, these strategies are no longer appropriate. If the school continues these strategies, we will be creating inequity within our school in which financial means decides the educational experiences and opportunities of our students. ESA's LOI is shifting dramatically and will continue to do so as the population transitions to only students selected by lottery. This is a good thing, but it creates challenges. Thus, I'm here to advocate for the students of ESA and any other specialized programs that are not currently receiving additional funding targeted to their programming. Students need the TDSB to review the funding model for specialized schools that have recently been shifted to a lottery system in order to ensure that these schools continue to provide quality programs that are accessible to the new diversity of students in their community. ESA in particular is seeing an increasing need for student support. We are seeing students who need access to a nutrition program and students who need financial support in order to participate in events, We are also seeing an increasing number of students who need our academic programs to improve in order to meet their learning needs. This means we cannot continue to underfund academic areas, especially in areas like STEM, or it will create significant achievement gaps along socioeconomic lines. So if the TDSB is serious about equity, I am asking that they do two things. One, they immediately implement a budget for any specialized school being assessed during access through the lottery system. This budget should be informed by the school's spending for specialized programs prior to the implementation of the lottery. Two, they reassess the needs of students in the lottery's cohorts to create a temporary LOI assessment in order to adjust the school's overall funding until the board completes a system-wide update of the LOI data. In closing, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to advocate for our students.
Thank you, Shah. If you don't mind, can you stay for a bit? If trustees have any questions or clarifications, Trustee Dan McLean, go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you today for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. Can you put out an approximate dollar value on the amount that students are expected to either fundraise or use to supply the materials that they are expected to provide?
I can't, and for many reasons. Firstly, the parents are amazing and they fundraise, but when parents are very privileged, it's easy to fundraise. The less privileged they become, this is going to be more difficult. So what you need to compare is what's happening at the grade 9 level to the other grades. A kid who is involved in something like visual arts may not pay that much out of pocket, but a kid who's in performances where they've got to go sell chocolates, the money didn't come out of their pockets, but it's extra time and effort on the kid's part. And then if they can't sell the chocolates, the option is they'll probably just buy it out of pocket, right? So I don't think we have that data. I mean, I agree that's a good question, but the board needs to be assessing these things. And right now there is no data, but what I can say is that teachers who are connected to the kids, we have more and more kids that we realize who are not participating because they just can't, and what have you. And so when we notice it, we can say, look, can we just waive the fee or help them? But when you ask kids to advocate by telling us that they're struggling, we're not going to find most of them.
Thank you. Would you have would you know how many students that the school was required to support or to waive the fees for? Do you know what kind of numbers we're talking about at this point?
We're trying to figure it out. Right now, I know at our last meeting, teachers were raising the fact that we have students who can't attend the performances. So we've been trying to create a system where if they could let us know, we would get the tickets, et cetera. So right now, it's a guessing game. But again, if you're creating a system where kids some kids can pay, some kids can't. And then what about how much fundraising is happening? I mean, I don't think the TDSB wants to continue a school. If this is about equity, we simply need to fund it. And I understand that we might fund it in a phase-in way because the cohorts are shifting. But I can't answer that. That's the TDSB has to come and figure this out. But not providing the funding is problematic. And what the TDSB needs to understand is that at some point in time, the school is going to be 100% students chosen by lottery. And is it right to say that we're going to try to figure out which kids can just pay out of pockets and which can't?
I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. Thank you, sir. We have Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if the delegate knows if the school has spent all their budget.
No, the school has not spent all their budget, and I wouldn't know the numbers. I know that there's a public funds and then there's a non-public funds, and I'm not going to call them two because I get mixed up. There's the money raised by parents. It's a separate issue, and I know there's still money there because
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the school budget because I was just checking on the public site that has all the school budgets where there's additional money provided for arts and for instrumental music, for example. And I was just wondering if the school has, if you know right now, if the school has spent all their allocated budget.
It may
If
not.
you don't, that's fine. I
So
was just
as
curious.
a department, head of department, we only recently got our budget, so we are in the process of spending it. But to put into context, when they distributed the amount of money to different subjects, science got $2,500. That is an unheard of small amount for science. Like, so the money is been recently given out to the departments, and it will get spent throughout the year.
And I have one more follow-up question for you. Do you think that these schools with specialized central programs should have larger budgets than regular composite high schools?
I believe they should have additional funding specifically attached to the specialized programming. And so they shouldn't be siphoning off academic funds in order to do that specialized programming. If we have additional programs that are not offered at other schools, yes, those additional programs have to get a fund.
Thank you for clarification.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Anybody else has a question for our delegate? Seeing and hearing none. Thank you, delegate. Can we have one more roll call, please? If anybody who has joined online, please identify yourself. Thank you.
Hi, it's Rachel Chernislin, Trustee Chernislin here. I have joined. Thank you.
And Trustee Lee has joined as well. Thank you.
And Trustee Roger Colsingham.
Thank you,
Trustee Dawson.
Thank you,
Trustee Williams. Sorry, Trustee Williams here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, all trustees. Moving along on the agenda item, staff reports. We have item 5.1, contract awards operations. Staff, who is speaking on this?
Thank you, and I would ask Executive Officer Snyder to speak to this report, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, and good evening to trustees and our stakeholders. In the operations report tonight, in Appendix A for information, we have 4 items. In Appendix B for committee approval, there are none. And in Appendix C for board approval, there are 2. And we're happy to take any questions the trustees may have.
Thank you, Executive Officers. Do we have a speakers list? Go ahead, Trustee Arts.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I just wondered if staff could go through the, sorry. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm on the wrong item, I think. No, sorry, my question is for the facilities one on the contract with Boise.
Sorry, Trustee Arts, we cannot hear you properly.
Sorry. My question is for the contract facilities, I think, for the other item, not for operations.
Facilities boards. It's for facilities. She has a question.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. Anybody else on the speakers list?
I'm happy to move the item, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Can we have a seconder for this? Thank you, Vice Chair Didavides. Can you open the vote, please?
Which one of facilities? She has a question.
Trustee Lee's in favor.
In favor.
Trustee Arts in favor.
Chernislin in favor.
Laskin in favor. It didn't come up on eScribe for me.
Yeah, the toy's not working for me either. McLean's also in favor.
We'll do a show of hands if it's not working, and trustees online can just say it loudly so we can hear it.
I think we all voted, Mr. Chair.
Did we catch everyone? Yep, it's right there. Trustee McLean in favor. Good. Thank you, trustees, and it carried. Item 5.2, contract awards facilities. And who's speaking on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the report you have in front of you tonight, in Appendix A, there are 24 contracts for information. There are 4 in Appendix B for committee approval, and there are 8 contracts in Appendix C for board approval. And again, staff are happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Executive Officer Snyder. And we'll have a speakers list on this item. Trustee McLean, go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair. Can you please remind me the difference between having one bid and it being a sole sourced, but how that's different? And
through you, Mr. Chair, one bid would say that we only had one respondent to the bid that was put out, where sole source was staff went directly to a vendor to secure the services.
through the chair. Again, so help me with the latter part. How do we're only to get these services from one particular place, and we're not able to accept bids from other?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what it means basically is when it was put out to tender, only one respondent responded to the tender. It wasn't a matter that it was available on bid and tenders, our site that we use to place it out for tendering and for people to submit their bids, but it means that only one person responded to the bid.
So that's what sole source means?
No, that's what one bidder indicates. Sole source is if staff went directly to a vendor and asked them to supply the service, and it didn't go out to competitive process.
So I've got one in my ward, for example, number 20, is that Etobicoke Collegiate Baldwin Sound Systems is the sole source. I'm not understanding why they're the only. I'm just not getting how there aren't 10 companies looking to do this work, and therefore we're getting the benefit of having them compete, so to speak.
So through you, Mr. Chair, for the example that the trustee put forward, which is for the Etobicoke Collegiate, it is for a PA system upgrade and it's proprietary technology. And so the company that supplied it has to supply the repair as well. And so there is not opportunity to go to a broader bid because it's proprietary to the type of system we have in place. And I'll turn to Executive Officer Pichetti if she wants to augment.
Thank you, through the chair. There are very technical pieces of equipment in our schools, and the technology belongs to the company that provided them. PA systems, there are differences between types of PA systems. So in this case, the replacement of components of that PA system had to be provided by the company that supplied and manufactured that PA head unit.
Thank you, and through the chair. So I assume we know that when we purchased from them, these types of sole source, and is it part of the agreement that we're required to deal with them? Is that part of our ongoing service expectations for the product, or is this solely that they're the only ones that know how to literally do this, so that they're the only ones that sell the round peg kind of thing, so we need to buy that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'll answer the question in a couple of aspects. In an example like the one that you're talking about in number 20 on the item tonight, when we purchased that, we understood that that was the only vendor that could supply repairs when it came to case. But in some other cases where something that may be more generic, we are buying from that vendor and we may go out and get multiple sources, or if it's an emergency, and some of these you'll see tonight in the electrical area are because of emergencies, we just go with sole source because we need to get repaired done quickly. But it's dependent on how proprietary the technology or the equipment we're buying is, whether we have to sole source in the future. But our staff, both purchasing and our facility staff, would take that into account when they look at the bid and say, we realize we're locked into this vendor for this equipment, for this site, or for this process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. Trustee Laskin?
Thank you very much, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. We have a lot of projects on the go, and I was just wondering, we're adding to the cadre of projects. So I was just wondering, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, if there's a sense that timelines are being kept, milestones are being met, or are we still in a bit of a construction crunch in the City of Toronto? Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, to you, Trustee Laskin, there are still pressures with mechanical equipment. And I do have Senior Manager Justin Amin on the line. And I wondered if he could speak to some of the timelines that we're experiencing specific for mechanical equipment, elevators, elevator control replacement parts. Those still seem to be taking much longer than they did before the pandemic. So, Senior Manager Amin?
Thank you, Executive Officer Pachetti. And through the chair, yes, what we noticed that was occurring during the pandemic is still occurring in terms of delivery of equipment. A good example is air handling units at one point prior to the pandemic would be anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks, maybe 12 weeks if it's a little bit more of a complex unit. That is now about a year out. So that does create a bit of complications for us in terms of executing the work, but we do schedule the work still in a way. Just the cycle of how would we do the design implementation. Sometimes it might not be within the same year, it might take a year and a half, might take 2 years. Part of it that we've noticed is that I think COVID exposed something with a lot of suppliers in the terms of the risk of keeping large inventories, because during that year and a half when a lot of the world pretty much shut down, that inventory became basically a liability to a lot of suppliers because they had product that was sitting there and they still had to pay their leases. And so what we found is we're getting more of it that they're keeping less stock, and a lot of it is more manufactured on demand. And that's part of the reason why a lot of that equipment is taking a little bit longer to get to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate that answer.
Do you have any more, Trustee Laskin?
No, that was it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Trustee Arts?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I wondered if staff could comment on a little bit on the contract with OISE and U of T for the environmental and sustainability education program. Just in terms of this, there's a lot more programming here than I expected to see for the price. It's great. It seems very extensive, lots of different types of programming. I'm just wondering how many, there's some mention of staff numbers for different programs, but overall, how many staff are engaging annually in the conferences and the professional learning being offered here?
Thank you, Trustee Arts. Staff, did you get the question?
Thank you, Trustee Arts, through the chair. I believe Senior Manager Christie is on the line and wondered if he could provide you with that response.
Yes, through the chair to the trustee. We do have annual reports. We've had this collaboration with OISE for 2 3-year terms already. So this is about renewing for another 3-year term. And we do have annual reports, so it varies year to year. And I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but I'm happy to follow up with the specific numbers for each year and how many teachers and students participated in the various programs year over year.
That's great. I was aware of the programming, but I don't think I've seen it like all in one place listed like this before, and it's quite extensive and it's great to see. So thanks. Yeah, I would appreciate, and even if actually just he said it's in an annual report, if you could direct me to the link so I could go back and review again, that would be great. Thanks.
Certainly, we can provide that information for all the trustees in next week's Trustee Weekly.
Okay, thank you, Maya. Trustee Arts, is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. And I have one question. Can I pass on the chair?
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to understand the process. And it's about the security cameras. It's 5 schools, close to $1 million. And I think we have 3 vendors who have chosen to bid on this, or maybe there might be more, but 3 have been awarded this. Isn't that if we choose one, we get a better price? So I like to understand why this has happened. I just want to understand.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's a very good question to ask. And we are treating these as our 5 pilot projects, because the first 2 camera installations we did in-house with our own in-house trades. And what we found with that is that it took a little longer, and it also meant that those trades weren't doing other work in other schools. So we wanted to go out with these bidders, or these pre-qualified contractors, to get a sense of what the costs would be, because we are going to be rolling out quite a few camera installation projects across the system. If you recall, Trustee Patel, we did take a report to board in the spring, and so this is the first sort of market test, as it were, to see what the pricing is like. I also would like to, if you don't mind, turn to Senior Manager Amin, because he's been very much involved in setting this up and can provide some further detail to you.
Thank you, Executive Officer Pichetti. And through the chair, yes, we decided that we would go initially to a group of our top performing electrical contractors, and we would basically go through the motions of having this work done by a contractor and get a feel for how the work would roll out, what complications would come up in terms of the contractors doing the work. The previous projects that were done, the previous pilots were done by in-house, so there is a slight difference between the in-house doing work in our buildings, who are very familiar with our buildings, very familiar with our facilities and how to access them, compared to the contractors. So these 5 projects are also pilots, but pilots with contractors. So based on the results of what we find on how this work rolls out, we'll be utilizing that to come up with a strategy for rolling out this program to the larger system. Because we did have, for the longest time, there was a pause on security camera installations, which I know is important to a lot of trustees and a lot of schools. We finally, since we have settled on the camera system, we're now working towards the rollout to the different schools.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can I have a follow-up?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I understand the logic of spreading out to 2 or 3 vendors because it's a pilot project. But did we make sure that we saved money because it's $1 million contract? So did we make sure in this process that we have saved money instead of doing a pilot project, picking up 3 vendors? Sometimes it costs more. So did we make sure that?
Thank you. And that was one of our sort of most important questions that we asked as we went through this. So there are really a couple things we were looking for. We wanted to understand what the costs would be. We wanted to understand what would be any complications that could come up doing this. But importantly, we also wanted to understand what the capacity of the contractors are to get this work done. Because don't forget, these camera installations are happening while the schools are occupied. So, when we are ready to now roll out the next group of projects, what you're speaking about in terms of volume savings is exactly what we're going to be looking at. And we will position it in a way where we can get competitive pricing, but that we can also increase the capacity of work that's undertaken.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I'll pass the chair back.
Thank you, Vice Chair Tyers. Do we have anybody else on speakers list? No. Thank you. Can I have a mover and seconder for this item? Trustee McLean, seconder, Vice Chair Matthias. And can we open the vote, please?
Shan in favor.
Laskin in favor.
And it carries. Item 5.3, 2023-24 revised financial state estimates.
Thank you, and through the chair. Good evening, trustees. We're happy to bring forward this report related to the 23-24 revised estimates. So as we know, each year the board prepares the budget to submit to the ministry on June 30th. Then, and that budget is based on estimated enrollment and projected expenditures. And then in addition, each year the board is required to submit a revised budget to the ministry by mid-December. So this report that's being brought to board is for information purposes, and that this has already been submitted to the ministry at the on December 22nd. So as we know, the grants are based on average daily enrollment for the most part, and that uses the average of enrollment on October 31st and March 31st. And the revised estimates allow the board to review its revenues and expenses and to use their actual enrollment on October 31st. So that half the calculation of our grants or the enrollment for the grants is actually grounded in reality, and it gives a more accurate projection of our estimated or our projected enrollment and therefore our projected revenue. The revised estimates also allow the board to do three things with regards to expenses. We use the experience of our previous year, because when we do the budget in June, we don't have the final results for year end. So we do now, and when we do the revised estimates, it allows us to use that experience. It also allows us to use the first quarter of the year, the first 3 months of the year that we're currently in, to see if there are any projected expenditures that are going to change significantly. So if we're seeing some trends, or if we saw an unforeseen expenditure that we know that we're not going to be funded for, it allows us to make that adjustment. It also allows us to use our actual staffing numbers and compensation numbers. So first in the revised estimates that were submitted to the ministry on December 22nd show that the projected deficit has remained approximately the same at 15.3 million. So first, I'd just like to talk a little bit about revenue and enrollment. So as we know, enrollment increased 0.7% over projections. And I want to once again acknowledge the great work of the planning department. When we prepare our enrollment projections, we want to be realistically conservative. We want enrollment to be as close to actual as possible so that the impact on, for example, reorganization in elementary schools is not significant at the beginning of the year. But we also don't want to go over project our enrollment, because we know what happens then, the challenges that it creates in year with regards to the budget. We also know that we don't build a contingency into our expenditures. And so therefore, if we have any unforeseen expenditures, or if any of our expenditures are higher than expected, there are also serious in-year budget challenges. So I'm going to speak to the changes at a high level, and then I'm going to turn it over to Executive Officer Snyder to provide more detail. So At the December 4th Audit Committee, the 2022-23 financial statements were presented. And at that time, it was noted that there were some expenses that came in higher than projection. And most of these expenses were related to either an increase in inflation that wasn't projected or higher than projected, and higher than average or higher than expected costs related to absenteeism. So through the revised estimates, staff was able to use this experience, and again, the experience of the first quarter of this current year, to be able to increase the budget for expenditures so that we don't experience the same challenges at year end. And it's important because as we will see further down in this report, when it comes to our actual and projected reserve balances in our deficit recovery program, we do need to have approximately, or to stay on line with that $15 million projected deficit that we had projected through the estimates. So it's important to note that if we had increased the enrollment during the budget process to not make some of the difficult decisions that were made, these additional costs related to inflation and absenteeism would still exist, and our budget deficit would be significantly higher at the revised estimate timeline. So I want to commend the trustees for their work that was done through the budget process to allow us to be in this important position for the revised estimates as we continue to work towards our deficit recovery plan and to maintain and build up our reserves. So I'm going to turn it over to Executive Officer Snyder to provide some more detail.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I'll just remind trustees as well that we're in the second year of a 3-year recovery plan that we submitted to the Ministry of Education. So there's 2 big areas I'm going to cover in tonight's report. One is to talk to you about the changes in the financial position that Associate Director Zucker just spoke to, and then I'll talk about the risks to this projection as we move forward. So on page 32 of your document, you see the high-level changes. And as Associate Director Zucker spoke, our original budget was a deficit of 15.1 million, and we are now at 15.3. We did see a gain in enrollment on page 32. It gives you the details of those gains, and we resulted in a revenue increase both for our grants for student needs. We also, through the hard work of our special education department, saw our special incident portion grant increase to additional claims that were submitted. In other revenues, we saw a minor decrease of $2.1 million. So overall, we see revenue change from the original budget of $34.7 million. As Associate Director Zucker said, there were expense changes that came with that. So we have increased our staffing. We have re-rolled out additional holdback as a result of enrollment, and there have been some changes in the compensation plans that were in place that we have to adjust for. One of the big changes was in the future employee benefits. And again, this was an unknown because our actuaries only do the work on our future employment liabilities as part of the financial statement preparation. And when they reported back to us on their analysis, they saw additional $8 million pressure for us for the current school year. In our facilities and maintenance area, we have an $11.5 million expenditure pressure. And this comes from 2 things mainly. One is the inflation that we're seeing on supplies and services, and the other is on staff absenteeism in the area of facilities and our capital colleagues. The next one is around supply costs for staff, school-based staff, and with the absenteeism rates we're seeing, we have provided an additional $5 million for that experience that we're seeing. Then there's, in all other expenses, there's about 2.2 million pressure. And again, primarily these are inflationary costs in various departments. I'd like to take you now to page 34 of the report and just talk about some of the risks so that you're aware of the projections challenges. So of course, as we know, the whole province, all school boards are seeing a supply staff pressure and absenteeism. Our Employee Services Department is working on addressing this, but it is an area of risk that we still are exposed to in the current environment that we're in for staffing. Our self-funded leaves for LTD and WSIB costs, we continue to monitor this for both with the School Board Collaborative Inc. that does some of our work for us in this area, but we do see a pressure there and a concern that the costs for self-funded leave insurance for WSIB and LTDI could increase. The next one, which Associate Director Zucker will talk about in a moment, is our status of our reserve funds. This is a challenge because a good organization should have between 1% to 2% reserves, and we're well below that right now. Of course, as hopefully we exit the hyperinflation, I'll call it, that we're currently in, an inflation risk still stands out as an area that we have concerns for as we try to project where the year is going to end. And then the last one that's more of one of our regular risks is that all things unknown. What could happen that we haven't anticipated? So if we find any of those as the year comes along, of course, we'll report them to our trustees. The last area I'd like to comment on tonight is labor rate changes. So on November 8th of 2019, Bill 124 was announced that forced by the government to freeze wages and compensation restraints. This has been challenged by the court and struck down as unconstitutional. There is currently an agreed settlement for the 1920 year at 0.75% increase for staff impacted, and for 2021, an additional 0.75 increase. The 21-22 wage adjustment is currently under arbitration and is being heard this week. The parameters that have been given for this arbitration are between 1.5 to 3.25% increase in the third year of the grievance on Bill 124. Those are compounding, of course, whatever the settlement is, and then they will be implemented across the 22-23 school year as well as 23-24. So until the arbitration decision is heard, and we're expecting that sometime in February, we do not know exactly what the impact is. The challenge and the risk for TDSB is around the funding of it and how the province is going to fund that Bill 124 and what it means to the net cost to the board. We, as you are aware, in our financial facts, we do highlight that we aren't completely funded. For example, with teacher salaries, it's between 1% to 2% variance between what our costs were versus the funding benchmark. So depending on how the ministry funds this agreement, that gap could widen. But we will up trustees once we know what the arbitration award is and we have instructions from the ministry on how school boards are to implement it. And now I'll turn it back to Associate Director Zucker to take you through the rest of the report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Officer Snyder. And on page 36 of the agenda, the last page of this report, just want to draw trustees' attention to the updated chart with regards to the reserves. So our working fund and internally restricted reserves at the end of August 2023, based on our audit, were $40.5 million. Included in this $40.5 million, there is the sinking fund interest, which is restricted, so we cannot touch that amount of 11.4. So we're looking at really 29.1 million of internally appropriated reserves. And when we have the deficit of 15.3 million that is projected for this year, we're looking at an ending reserve balance of 13.8 million. Included in this 13.8 million, you will see things like school support. And what that is, for the most part, are the school budget carry forwards. So again, there's not a lot of room here for us to be able to dip into our reserves. You'll see the working fund reserve, which is really the unrestricted part, is zero. And we've actually been using the benefit funds on deposit, which means we had a reserve set aside to help us to fund some of our benefit costs that would happen on an annual basis. And now anything that is above what we've budgeted for will actually impact our bottom line as opposed to being able to be funded by this reserve that we had set aside. So I just want to, this wouldn't be, I don't think, news to anybody here, but it just a reminder. And again, these have been updated with our actual starting point. And the last thing that I wanted to bring attention to was on page 35. Through the budget process, there was a motion passed that a report come back on the possible addition of elementary vice principals based on available resources. So there was an increase in enrollment, and we have looked at the enrollment on a per school basis, but enrollment is not the only factor in the allocation of vice principals. So in the fall, staff did review the allocation, and based on the factors, there were no vice principals added without additional funding, or we don't move vice principals whose enrollment did not meet projections. So we use our projections to allocate vice principals, again, as one factor. And we do not do a reorganization similar to the one that we do for teachers. So in certain instances, we have in the past added vice principals when it was necessary, and I think we actually may be adding one shortly. As an example, when issues come up, we are using that information to add, but through the budget process, especially given the position that we're in our recovery plan, we have not and would not recommend adding any additional vice principals. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, Associate Director Stacey and Executive Officer Snyder. We have a speakers list, and we'll start with Trustee Lee.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and really appreciate staff for the report. A couple of questions on the higher than expected cost. This happened, I think, last year as well, or at least last time when we had an enrollment surplus versus budget. I thought it was last year where we got $50 to $60 million more, but then we also had $50 to $60 million more in cost. I guess my question to staff is, how do we, in the future, set our budget up in a way where we don't have to come back in the beginning of the upcoming school year and we revise cost estimates. And the reason why I'm saying is, I think we're fortunate that our increase in enrollment covered for the incremental cost. But I believe when we started our budget process last year, our gap was around 60 million that we were looking for. And, this basically tells me that we underestimated our gap by around 50%. So how do we, reduce this variance in the future?
Thank you, and through the chair, it's a great question, and it's something that we've been working on ourselves. Absenteeism has been a significant challenge, or the costs of absenteeism have been a significant challenge, and we have been using our actual experience in order to estimate, and each year that number continues to increase. So for the 24-25 budget, we will use our experience of this year, but actually continue to increase it. We know that that creates a budget pressure, and so in order for us to be able to fund those increases, we will have to make reductions in other areas. So what we're doing is using not only the actual costs, but our experience between exactly what you're saying, what we have been projecting versus what the actual costs have come in, to see if there are any adjustments that we have to make. The other possibility is to build in a contingency into our budget process. So to set aside some funds that don't have anything specific allocated to it, so that when we do have some unforeseen either inflationary costs or costs that have to do with any kind of emergency or unforeseen circumstance, that we have a funding source for those costs. So those are the types of things that we're looking at through our budget process. Again, we're trying to be conservative, yet at the same time, we don't want to be in a position where we're overestimating costs so that we are having to make reductions in order to balance the budget. So I think it's finding that fine line. I think if you look at 2021-22, we were significantly, our actual costs were significantly over our projected costs. In 22-23, it was quite a bit less. I think it was about 8 million over where we had projected. So it went from 40 million to 48 million. So I think we're getting better at this, and that we will continue to ensure that the expenditures that we're providing through the budget process are as realistic as possible.
Thank you, Associate Director. And I 100% agree with everything you just said. As a trustee, I find it incredibly hard to cut programs and cut funding when we run out of money. So I think a more, a smaller variance in cost, in actual cost versus projection, will allow us to, I guess, properly fund the things that we could actually afford, as opposed to, optimistically fund something and then realize that we couldn't afford it, and then we have to go through the entire process to find money to cut back. So I really appreciate that. You mentioned staff absenteeism. To me, that's a root cause of many of our budget problems. Is there anyone in this room that's prepared to speak about how we can reduce that expenditure? And also, do we understand exactly what's driving it?
So through the chair, I think that there will be more information coming back about this, but I believe that Associate Director Pon is also on the line if she wanted to add anything.
Thank you very much. Yes, we actually have been working on a number of strategies, including some assessment of the root causes of the absences, as it is very complex, and it's not a singular factor that's resulting in this period. We have been working on, one of the system officers, Chris Chakraborty, has been working on developing a new process to address these type of matters. It requires a little bit more work, and so that is one of the items. We've also taken a look at other avenues, for example, just to see if there are ways to improve our disability management process. And another system officer has been doing tremendous work on talent acquisition, talent management, in part to support the shift from employee services to the people and culture department. So there are a lot of things that are underway. Some of these things do take quite a bit of time. There's also some structural changes that are beyond the control of TDSB, including the design of the current sick leave plan, global patterns of global patterns of available workers in jobs, and just different desires, I guess, from workers in the types of jobs that they want. So TDSB is not isolated in its challenges with attendance or sick leave. Other school boards are also feeling the effects of that. Other organizations or other employers are also feeling the effects of worker shortages as well. Period. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we know when we're going to get that report? Or is there a report coming for staff absenteeism?
Through the chair, we are working on, first of all, trying to manage the challenges. So our focus really right now is making sure that the schools have staff. We are also planning to do an analysis that will be in writing, and that will be, once it's completed, certainly information will be shared with the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Ideally, before the next budget cycle, we have a view of how we can reduce this expenditure line item. That'll be really appreciated. And the final question I have is, I believe during the last budget cycle, and maybe I missed this, and I apologize if I did, I think staff was working on a report on what we're going to be doing about the student devices. Did that land somewhere? Because I don't remember it coming to FBAC.
Trustee Lee, can you repeat?
There was a report that was scheduled to come to either FBAC or board on what we're going to be doing on our student computing device program, and how we can improve the financials of that. Are we still going to receive something like that, or has it already come for another meeting that I just didn't catch?
Through the chair, that will be provided through the budget process. So it will either be the special FBEC on January 29th or the next one on February 14th, the plan. So it'll be one of those two items. It will be a separate report that trustees will receive.
Got it. All right. Thank you. That's all. Really appreciate all the hard work from staff.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. The next on the list is Vice Chair Diabetes.
Thank you, through the chair. First questions in regards to simple question. I just didn't understand the explanation. The SIP, the SIP, I'm not sure how we call the acronym. The amount listed, is it above what we expected, or is that the total that we received?
Sorry, through you, Chair. Which line are you speaking to?
The special incidents portion.
The special incidents portion was additional funding that we received from above our anticipated back when we did the budget with you last year because of the excellent work that our special education department did to submit more claims and have the window extended.
No. And I remember that conversation. So the question is, the 5.5, is it above what we expected? So whatever we had planned for, we got 5.5 more. Oh, that's great. Because I think the original amount we budgeted for, from memory, was around 5 million.
Yeah, it was, I believe, but sorry, one moment. They went up 5 more.
Through the chair, I think we estimated about 15 million, and it's closer to 20 million that we're receiving.
Okay. And that was the one-time source of revenue because the process has now been changed, if I remember correctly, right?
Right. So they're looking at this funding model right now. So what they said was in 23-24, it was going to be claims-based. In 22-23, it was going to be claims-based. And then 23-24 was a 5% increase of the 22-23 number. And then they're going to be looking at the funding model and may adjust it for 24-25. So we will wait to see what that looks like for the future budget.
Thank you. And for the next part, I have a letter from one of my student councils, one of my schools. So just want to read a little bit of a part of it because it relates to, they wanted to share concerns about staff shortages. So on behalf of students of C.W. Jeffries Collegiate Institute, I'm writing to you to express concern regarding the shortage of teachers at our school. Over the past couple of years, the community at CWJ has had to grapple with the prolonged absence of stable teachers, leaving us to navigate essential parts of our high school year without adequate support. They then go on to explain having to go through classes, not knowing who's going to be marking their reports, not knowing if they're going to have credits for all the courses that they're taking, and so on. And I've had this conversation with students in different high schools, and they share similar concerns. And so then they end up by saying, we would like to bring to your attention this issue that has been affecting both the administration and students here at C.W. Jeffries. Due to the absence of teachers to build relationships with and the lack of proficiency in critical subjects like math, science, and English, students are uncertain about their prospects in high school. We kindly request your assistance in addressing the matter promptly. Wanted to share that. And I know we've had this conversation and the previous speaker asked some questions about that. My request to staff is to see whether or not we can get a fill rate report similar to what we did last year a couple of times that would update information as to what's happening in some of our schools. Because from my experience and from what I saw last year, not all schools are affected the same way. And I'd like to see our progress in terms of how we've been able to, make a dent into this issue from the bottom, from the basement that we hit during COVID. Is that something that we may be able to see soon?
Thank you. And through the chair, I'll ask Associate Director Pond to respond.
Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing the letter from the students at C.W. Jeffries. It is our strong commitment to try to get all the schools staffed on a regular basis. It's a concern we also share as well. We will certainly be able to provide some fill rate data and some additional data and information to the trustees once we have more analysis completed. Thank you.
I appreciate the response. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Diabetes. Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and through the chair. I just want to follow up a little bit on the SIP funding so that I'm understanding correctly. The 5.5 that's listed here was additional money that we were able, in terms of claims, that we were able to identify, submit for the last school year. Is that correct?
So through the chair, while we were doing the budget process, we hadn't finalized the submission of the claims. So we had estimated that the claims would allow us to have a $15 million revenue source. Once the claims were finalized and submitted, we're closer to 20 million. So that's what that $5.5 million difference is. It's the increase in funding as a result of the actual claims that were submitted for 22-23.
Right, okay. So we were catching up on that which improved the previous year. So when we budgeted for this present school year, 23-24, and given, if I understood it correctly, there was a 5% increase on what is now 20.5, because we budget 15, the actual was this increase in, so the actual for last year was a little over 20 million. Given the increase, does that affect our, because now it's going to be a formula driven as opposed, so does that represent an increase in our position, our budgeted position that we had set for this school year?
So through the chair, so we submitted claims for 22-23, and it was 5% less than 20.5 million, whatever that number is, 18 million. I can't do math in my head. So we submitted those claims for 22-23. What the ministry said was for 23-24, they would take the 22-23 actual and increase it by 5%, and that would be the budget for this year. That's how much we would receive in funding for this year. So 22-23 increased, and then 23-24 as a result of the actual claims for 22-23 increased by 5.5 million from the projection in June. Let me do math on the calculator. So our actual claims were 19.5 million for 22-23.
So we get to imply, then we get to, for this year, then we can expect to be funded in the neighborhood of 20 million.
Right. And so that's what that increase is, because when we did the budget in June, we only said 15 million.
Okay, but given that we got 5 million more than we thought we were going to get, or that we had indicated previously that we were going to get, did that 5 million increase our position somewhere? Did we not get 5 million for our past experience that wasn't recorded when we were sitting down doing our budget process?
Yes. So in 22-23, when we did our actuals, it was 5 million. Well, it was significantly more than we had budgeted in 22-23. It came in at 19.5 million, and so that's how much was recorded in our financial statements. In June, when we projected what it would be for this year, we had already known that we were going to have an increase, so we had projected it at 15 million. But our actual is going to be 20.5 million, so that's why you see an increase in our revised estimate revenue of 5.5 million. It's the difference between what we thought we were going to get at 15 and what we're actually getting at 20.5. So it is an increase in revenue for the current year of 5.5 million. Sorry, maybe I'm not.
No, I'm sure it's me. Through the chair, last year we incurred 35 million worth of expenses, and we had put in for 30, and they made up the other 5. We would have been funded for that last year, would we not? I think we're getting into trouble because the difference is 5 in both ways, and I'm trying to ascertain whether we actually, for last year, got an extra 5 that we wouldn't have been able to count in our budget process, so we got an extra 5, and now we're in a position to suggest that because they were higher and we've been projected at another 5 for this year, I'm wondering why the 2 5s don't make 10, I guess is where I'm coming at this from?
So 5 of it went to last year's actual revenue. So in our financials, so we had a $48 million deficit in 22-23. It would have been 53 million if we hadn't got that 5. And so now this year, we're getting 20.5 million. So it's 5 million more than we thought we were going to get. Because we had already projected we were going to get 15 million. And the 5 million that we got more last year went into last year's revenue.
Right, but we wouldn't have known that in June, would we? Weren't we ultimately $5 million better off for last year that we were hoping to get, but we couldn't budget for, we couldn't announce, we couldn't account for, although we were hoping that work would result in the good numbers that we got, but we weren't in a position to account for it then. So do we not get to count it at some point? Does it not roll over into this cycle at some point?
So through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I can assist. So last year, through the budget cycle, we weren't firm on the number because our colleagues in special ed were working through their work. So we submitted a budget to you and you approved a budget based on what our best thinking of SIP was at that point in time. By the time we finished last year's year end, we have all the revenue that we were supposed to get into the budget, as Associate Director Zucker said, and we had a $48 million deficit opposed to a $53 million. So this year, what you're seeing in this $5 million is two things. One is the difference of what we guessed at when we built the budget versus what the work special ed did, as well as the 5% increase. So the funding's in both years the right way. It's just a timing of when the work was completed versus our budget development timeline didn't quite sync.
Okay, we'll deal with this offline, and I won't waste everybody else's time when I'm the only one that seems to be stuck here. I'm interested in other revenue. We don't have an abundance of revenue models. We were down 2.1. Does that pertain to international students? And I'm wondering, I was a little concerned recently, I've heard the federal government talk about an interest in reducing international students, and I'm wondering whether we fear that is going to deal with us, or is that a post-secondary that's in danger of being restricted, or do we think that they're going to cut off this revenue stream conceivably?
So thank you, and through the chair, I can ask Executive Officer Snyder to provide some details with regards to other revenue. But what I'll say is our international student numbers are a little bit higher this year than we had projected. But we are concerned about the recent announcement and how it will impact international students moving forward. So we are working through that announcement right now to determine the impact, but there is a possibility that it will impact our numbers. I will say the other thing that's impacting international student revenue is that we made some changes with regards to our processes following the Education Act, as opposed to the way that the ministry had asked us to charge fees previously. So that would mean that our enrollment numbers would increase, but our international student numbers would decrease. So net, we shouldn't see a significant difference in grant or in revenue, but you may see a decrease in international student revenue as we allow more students to be non-fee paying students of the board. So as we have those conversations, and as we want to ensure that anybody who can be a non-fee paying student is a non-fee paying student, it may impact the comparators from previous years where we were charging fees in some instances. So I'll turn it to Craig to talk about what's included in other revenue, but for international students, we are looking at what the impact is on next year's budget.
So through you, Mr. Chair, and there was a question in the chat, which I'll try to address at the same time. So we have decreased interest income revenue to us by about 5.5 billion because we are seeing a softening and the projected softening of interest rates for the balance of the year. We are anticipating 1.2 million increase in lease revenue for our lease spaces. And international students, we're projecting $2.2 million increase for a net of those three of 2.1 decrease. As far as the question that you're asking and the question that was asked in the chat, this is increase of 2.2 is based on 161 additional ADE, and our total ADE of students for this year is 1515 of international students.
Okay, thank you. And my last question through the chair. We talked about the challenges of staffing and supply staffing, and I'm wondering whether the director, in the course of her meetings with other directors, with the ministry, if this is, as was shared by Associate Director Pond, this is an ongoing challenge for, multiple boards, if not all, throughout, whether the ministry seems to be open to, recognizing the problem and open to addressing the problem, if you like, as opposed to just simply continuing to park it on our door.
Good evening. Through the chair, this is a regular point of conversation for directors during our regular virtual meetings as well as in between meetings. I believe that the Ministry of Education has, through negotiations, is considering what options exist, but I would leave that to Associate Director Pond and the staff and people in culture to respond more specifically to the actions taken. With regards to any strategies being directly proposed for this year by the Ministry of Education to address absenteeism, I cannot commit to that. We have not heard of a precise plan.
Thank you, Director. Do we have anybody else on the list? So I got one question of clarification.
Please, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. So through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to understand item 5 on agenda 32. It says increase in facilities and maintenance expense. So when I go to the notes, it says facilities and maintenance budget has increased due to inflationary pressure. I understand that part. Staff absenteeism, what that has to do with facilities. I'd like to know that. Is the staff absenteeism in the facilities department or the education department? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you, Trustee Patel, for that question. So on the maintenance side, as with other employee groups, we are seeing absenteeism rates, and we have an aging building portfolio. We have things that need to be fixed, and you can't set them aside. You have to get them fixed. And with our collective agreement, we would have to go to the appropriate trades to find somebody who can do that repair work. So similar to pressures that are felt in schools, we are seeing also the pressures for maintaining and addressing emergencies in our schools. The other thing I would point out is a lot of the work that we have to do on the maintenance side, those repairs cannot happen when the school is occupied. So a lot of times the work has to happen in the evenings and sometimes even on the weekends because there are other users in the schools in the evening. So when we do environmental abatement, for example, the building of a certain type, the building cannot be occupied. So that increases costs because you're having to do that work evenings or on the weekends. And then the other thing to say, and I know it's mentioned there, the inflationary pressures, everything's gone up. Supplies, tools, materials, the gas that runs our vehicles, the purchase of parts for our vehicles, everything has gone up across the board. And we're feeling that, as many people are, and that has had an impact on our budget as well.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, is there any way we can have a separate line item for staff absenteeism according to the departments? Because when it comes to staff absenteeism, we all talk about the teachers, and teachers only, right? So is there any way we can have a separate item with a dollar figure, so at least we know where we're heading? Because teacher shortages, I understand it's all across the board. As Vice Chair and Chair DWDs a while ago said about Cedar Jeffries, I face the same challenges. I have 8% fill-in rates. So I understand that's the system-wide, but the pressure it's keeping on the financials, that's very important to know, because parent community thinks other way, because the communications sometimes are not clear. So if we can have a line item in our financials that, due to absenteeism of staff in various departments, it's not just the teaching department, these are the financial pressures we have, if it's possible.
Yeah, sorry, through the chair, we can provide that information for sure. And we are looking at ways to report to trustees on a regular basis absenteeism and just to, because we do believe that it's important to track it.
Thank you, Associate Director. Thank you, Chair.
I'll hand the chair back.
Thank you, Chair. Anybody else on the speakers list? Thank you. Can I have a mover and seconder for this item? Trustee McLean, Vice Chair DWDs, seconding. Can we open the vote, please?
In favor.
Trustee Lee is in favor.
Vice Chair San,
In favor.
and it carries. Thank you, trustees. Moving along, item 5.4, three-year enrollment projections, 2024-25 to 26-27. And who's speaking on this?
Thank you. I'll ask System Officer Andrew Gowdy to speak to this, please.
Thank you, Associate Director. Good evening, trustees, staff, and members of the public. Through the chair, I'm accompanied online this evening by Nahama Hertzberg, who is our Manager of Enrollment and Planning Services. Nahama coordinates the production of our enrollment projections. The report before you is an annual report that we will produce at this time in the school year for receipt. It contains our system enrollment projections for next school year and the following 2 school years. These enrollment projections are updated every year based upon the most recent actual enrollment trends and demographic factors. These projections are used in the budget process and the staff allocation process. They're also reported to the Ministry of Education for funding purposes. The projections contained in the report are average daily enrollment, or ADE. This is the result of averaging full-time equivalent enrollments measured on October 31st and March 31st of a school year. The AD enrollment excludes fee-paying students or international students. For the elementary panel, we're projecting small increases for the next 2 school years, followed by a small decrease for the 3rd year. These projections are based upon the retention rates through the grades remaining at the post-pandemic level. Retention rates are the number of students who move from one grade to the next grade in the following year. The projections are also based on newcomer admissions remaining high at a similar level as this year. The small decline we are projecting for the 3rd year is due to a smaller junior kindergarten cohort entering the system and a larger grade 8 cohort graduating from the elementary panel and going on to secondary. The junior kindergarten enrollment is anticipated to be less because the number of 3-year-old children in the city is decreasing. This comes from population data we purchase every year from a third-party demographic company that compiles a mini census every year. For the secondary panel, we are projecting an increase for next year, a very small decrease for the following year, and an increase for the 3rd year. These projections are based upon the retention rates through the grades remaining at the post-pandemic level and newcomer admissions remaining at a similar level as this year. The increases are due to large grade 8 cohorts graduating from the elementary panel and entering grade 9. The very small decrease for the second year is due to a slightly smaller cohort of grade 8 students entering the secondary panel for that particular year. Looking at elementary and secondary together, our system enrollment is projected to increase by approximately 1,400 students next year, followed by a stable year, and then followed by an increase of approximately 300 students the year after. Before closing, I'd just like to clarify that these projections keep the immigration rates high. The high immigration rates are being countered by people moving out of the city and smaller preschool age cohorts entering the system. This concludes our presentation. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Planning Officer Andrew Gowdy, do we have a speakers list? Anyone online? Seeing, hearing none. Can you have a mover and seconder for this item?
Laskin.
Trustee Laskin and seconded by Trustee McLean.
James Lee's in favor.
Nathan Shan in favor.
And it carries. Thank you. Item 5.5, pilot dog run update. And who is speaking on this?
Thank you. And through the chair, I'll ask Executive Officer Pachetti to speak to this.
Thank you. Through the chair. Good evening, trustees. The report before you is for receipt, and it is a follow-up to the trustee motion from the fall of 2019 regarding the selection and implementation of a dog run pilot at a TDSB school. I'm afraid that the operational needs arising from the pandemic delayed the advancement of work on the dog run pilot motion until 2023. As work began on this report, we became aware that the city was developing a comprehensive citywide strategy to address dog off-leash areas. This report is anticipated to be completed by the third quarter of 2024. The report will build on design standards and operational issues associated with off-leash dog areas in the city. Now, given the work that the city will be undertaking, our report recommends that we defer the selection and implementation of the dog run pilot, as the TDSB could benefit from the city's research and recommendations, especially given that the city has experience already with the construction and management of off-leash dog areas. So in the report, we provide you with a little bit of information as to the definition and requirements of dogs off-leash areas that's currently on the city's website. Our report also talks about some of the current concerns that we have in terms of safety, access control, and the costs associated with implementing dog run areas on TDSB properties. We did want to let you know that we acknowledge that this is a problem in the city, and the pandemic in many ways contributed to the problem, and increased density in the city is also creating challenges for us, and in part that's why we're very happy to see that the city is taking this more comprehensive approach. One of the other things that we wanted to update you about is in recent conversation with the city's municipal licensing and standards department, they've indicated that yes, bylaw officers will follow up and investigate a complaint if it's logged through 311. Now, it doesn't mean it's instantaneous, as most of us know that there's tremendous pressure on 311, but they will keep track and they will send bylaw officers to a TDSB property. This is a different approach than a few years ago, and I understand in part this has to do with the fact that the city has augmented some of its resources in terms of bylaw officers. So some of the things we would want to consider with the implementation of dog run areas on TDSB properties is developing design standards that result in secure, durable dog run areas. Contrary to popular belief, it's not just a matter of putting up fencing and adding a gate. You need to design surfaces that are durable. You need subgrade drainage. You need appropriate fencing, and you need a good maintenance plan because dogs are tough on their areas, as the city has found out. We also would need to find a funding source in order to both construct a dog run park, but also to maintain the space because they do require maintenance. We need to understand what are the liability impacts, not just about humans interacting with dogs, but even dogs interacting with dogs. And this is another thing that the city will, we would look to the city's report for some guidance on this. And most importantly, we need to determine the size needed for a dog run park and then identify what sites we have in the city that could accommodate the size of a dog run park. And some of our urban sites, as you know, are very constrained. So, and very, with a high student population. So, whether we could give up space to create a dog run park is something we would need to look at. So as the report notes, TDSB would benefit from the research and recommendations that are in the city's report. And we will work with TLC to open discussions with the city staff to potentially seek opportunities to support the city's dog run program. And our commitment is to bring a report back in the fall of 2024 after the city's report is received and approved at council. And our report will provide some insights and recommendations based on the city's report. And I just want to take a moment to thank the work of Regional Manager Shirley Adderley and Senior Manager Jonathan Grove, who helped me with this report. And we would be very pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Executive Officer Maya, for this report. And we do have a speakers list, and starts with Trustee Laskin. Trustee Laskin, go ahead.
Thank you very much, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. Thank you for this report. It has been a long time coming, and I do appreciate it being here. And I do appreciate that common sense does demand it to be put aside until the city comes through with their analysis. But I did have a question. In that analysis, has TDSB spoken through TLC and determined potential school grounds that could potentially be used? And my goal would be that then gets absorbed into the city's program, and they would pay the costs. So I'm just wondering if those conversations has happened. That's my first question through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, Trustee Laskin, that conversation with the city hasn't happened yet. It is imminent. The conversation has happened with TLC. So we are looking for an opportunity with TLC to make those connections. And your idea is, in fact, what we would be interested in exploring with the city. Not dissimilar to some of the community agreements that we have that were previously funded through Section 37, for example, for playgrounds. That
right,
similar thing.
Exactly. My second question through you, Mr. Chair, to staff is, so the 311 news is new. Many of us that have had issues with dogs in our school grounds for years, first it was the city bylaw officers would deal with it, then no, not at all. It's only under TDSB, and now we're back to 311. This is really important information, especially the logging of complaints. I think it would be really helpful to have those statistics. So I'm wondering through staff, how are principals and school communities being made aware of this change? And is it going to be part of a TDSB Connects or a special bulletin or how is this being addressed through you, Mr. Chair, to staff?
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. I believe in the report we do talk about making that information available to principals exactly as you've described through System Leaders Bulletin, as well as TDSB Connects, which does go out to the broader school community.
Thank you. I'm trying to think of a vehicle that we use though that goes beyond just parents and caregivers from the school, but communities at large. And I'm wondering if there's been any reach out to city councilors to also include this in their communications. That just might be, I mean, I'm just trying to think of ways. A lot of complaints come by neighbors, not necessarily parents or caregivers of a school. So I'm just really wondering how that can be advertised. And I'm even wondering if, you know, obviously when this report, assume it's just for receipts. So when it passes board, if there could be some sort of media release, some sort of understanding so the media also can help us. There have been articles, many articles about unfortunate incidents that happen when children are harmed through dog incidents. But I'm really wondering about getting the word out to the public because I agree 311, it doesn't mean they're going to come instantaneously and catch the perpetrator. But if we can provide, you know, as much information as possible to the public so these can begin to be logged so we can see where the issues are in particular schools and communities, I think that will only help us when we deal with the report in the fall. So that would be my ask through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Will certainly look into that. And if I can just say, as someone who does live in the city of Toronto, I think most of us would think to call 311 rather than, and you know, we've had this struggle of trying to make sure that people know that they can call our security, our on-call center and so on. Most Torontonians would naturally call 311, but I do appreciate your point getting that knowledge out there and looking at how we can get that knowledge out there.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. We have Trustee Dawson. Trustee Dawson, go ahead. Trustee Dawson, you there? All right. Trustee Arts.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. To staff, thank you very much for this report. I'm very excited that 311 is going to be available again. I do live in an area with a lot of dogs and constant dog issues at our schools and complaints, and just got another email today. So this is great. If staff have can prepare something that we could share with our counselor and some of our community groups, that would be really great. But my question is, with the logging of the calls, will we have access to that data that 311 is going to be logging? Like, will they provide us with the number of incidents and lists of schools where they get calls from?
Thank you. Through the chair to Trustee Arts. I'm going to need to follow up on that because I am not 100% sure if they would provide us with that information. We can certainly ask, we can follow up, and maybe it is not, you know, for privacy reasons, it wouldn't contain some of the detail that 311 would have, but more about number of calls that have been made with regard to a specific school property. So I'll follow up with that and provide an update to trustees.
That would be awesome. Yeah, and I would agree. I don't think we need too much in relation to details. Other than it would be great to know which, like working with the city, which school properties or groups of school properties need more attention to address issues, or where issues become a bit more pressing. In that way, I'm wondering, do we actually track reports from our schools? I know there's some where they involve an actual incident, that their incidents forms are filed, but do we track anything from our principals about shared struggles with dogs?
Through the chair, yes, Trustee Arts, we do. And I see that Senior Manager Jonathan Grove is on the line. Maybe he can provide you with a little bit of the detail of how we do that.
Thank you, Executive Officer Pichetti, and through the chair. Any time that a member of the public contacts our Security Operations Center, call center, we log the information. And so we do have a running database of any dog-related issues. So as long as it flows through the SOC, we do have record of it. We've also provided a small bit of insight in the report outlining some of the number of incidences that have occurred with dogs. And I believe it's approximately 90 instances in the last school year that we have record of. But those records go back several years. And so we are able to pull that data from the SOC.
Okay, great. No, I did see that data, but I was wondering, I'm just thinking in terms of examples, you did provide some information on the kind of costs to like cleaning up yards, cleaning up playgrounds. I've always been particularly offended, even before I had kids in the TDSB, I was always particularly offended by, going over to a kindergarten playground at the neighboring school with my toddler and finding dogs running around in there. And but because I do know from talking to caretakers and principals that a lot of it is kind of dealing with issues in the moment. So I didn't know. I know I've had a couple of caretakers say they've intervened between an aggressive dog owner who doesn't want to leave the kindergarten yard and the parents who would like their children to use the kindergarten yard. And I would consider that, since they've had to intervene, I would consider that an altercation, like at least a verbal altercation that has happened between a dog owner and families. I just didn't know if we log at that, if we have a mechanism to understand the day-to-day that staff are dealing with at the schools.
Through the chair, Trustee Arts, I'm not sure if caretakers, I don't believe caretakers would have a central place where they could log these incidents. It's certainly something we could look at just from a kind of system survey point of view. We frequently send out surveys or questionnaires to our caretakers to kind of gather information. So we could certainly look at doing that. I mean, there is no, kind of one place where you can log those things unless you do call our call center and a security guard is issued. And we even have had that happen during the school day. It's not just after hours, during the school day as well. So we can follow up with that and try to get a better sense of how often it's happening during the school day.
Yeah, and I'm not looking to create work, but if it's something that's, that would piggyback on something that you already do, then great. Because I just note that I have some schools where the complaints coming from families and from staff and the incidents are constant and much higher than at other schools. Like it does seem to be not necessarily every school. So I don't know if that would help inform, how we collaborate with the city going forward. But really happy to see the things the city is doing, and look forward to that report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. Trustee Dawson, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Apologies for that. I had trouble unmuting. I have to say I really appreciate the inclusion of the city council motions in here, because they would be helpful for me to be able to share with some of my families. I had a question about the signage included in our materials. Who does that phone number go to?
Through the chair, that phone number is to our call center.
Okay, so to our call center
Yes.
and not to 311.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so what is the process if people phone that number? How does it get then to 311?
We would not call 311. Well, we haven't called 311 at this point. So when somebody calls our call center, depending on availability of our mobile security, we will send somebody to investigate. Now, we have limited resources. It's not often that they can turn up almost immediately when a call is logged. Similar to 311, what happens is there may be several calls that are logged, and then that would result in the security making a point to be there at a specific time to see if there's like repeat behavior and they can find the person who's been doing this. But with 583 properties and not as many mobile security forces on the road, it's not very often that we can turn up immediately and when that call is made.
Okay, so just from a process standpoint, if a parent or community member sees a person with a dog on school property, they are to call that phone number, which then patches them through to our call center, at which point our call center would advise to call 311 if there's no security person available. I'm just wondering, like, how do people know to contact 311 if 311 is now allowing these reports to be made?
Well, we can look at including in our response when someone calls that they can also call 311, but I will tell you it's the same issue with 311. They typically don't respond immediately. They tend to log complaints and then respond when there are a few of them. Obviously, I can't speak for 311. There may be instances, obviously, where they send somebody immediately, but that's typically the way it happens. And what we know is even in the time it takes for our security to go to the site, often the dog walker or the people on the property with their dog have left. But, we have had 91 instances of people calling in and we've gone to respond. Whether or not that has resulted in us actually speaking with the person, I'm not sure about that. I don't know whether Senior Manager Grove knows of the 91s, whether there was an actual conversation.
Thank you. And through the chair, I don't have that information readily available. However, it is logged in the data in the SOC. And so if we would like to, that information can be shared with trustees later.
Thanks. I think that would be great. Like, just in getting to, the data points that were made by my colleagues. I think, if we were to get the TDSB call center data as well as the 311 data, that I think will only help with our efforts and also the city's efforts to address this. Another question, was it discussed with the city to kind of take a proactive approach? Is that within their capability to, kind of on an ad hoc basis, send bylaw officers out to some of the key schools where we've received a number of complaints during peak hours?
Through the chair, that was not offered by municipal license and standards, and I think that's probably just a reflection of their own, pressure on resources and so on. I mean, we can have that discussion with them, we have had a few cases where we did have our security guards at a site because, we were in advance sort of anticipating that the people with the dogs would be coming on the property at the same time. I mean, we've done that a few times, but we can certainly have that conversation with 311.
Yeah, to be honest, I think it would be better than just receiving calls. Like, calls are important from the data perspective, I think, but by the time, like you said, they get to the site, the offender might already be gone. So, a ticket can't be issued or anything like that. So I think a proactive approach in partnership with the city would be helpful. And then I guess my next question is, how are what kind of training, if any, is being given to the 311 operators to know of this change and the bylaw officers? Because I'm not sure when it came into effect, but it seems like people are still under the impression that that's not within their jurisdiction. So is there a category being added to a drop-down menu? Like, how are people going to know about this change at the city?
I would have to ask municipal license and standards to provide us with a little bit more detail on that part of how they're supporting this and operationalizing it within their own system. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be helpful to be proactive about that. Otherwise, it'll create confusion if I go to schools and say, this is what you're now allowed to do, if they haven't yet updated their internal procedures. So if we could be made aware, even through Trustee Weekly, once that's officially in effect at the city, that would be really beneficial, to be able to direct families to that new process. And that's everything for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson. We have Trustee Lee.
I'm going to ask a fairly silly question. I really tried my best to understand what's in the report, but I feel like I'm missing a couple of things. Like, does this open up some of our properties to potential dogs for access?
Through the chair, Trustee Lee, I think what we want to understand is where the city is going with their citywide approach. I'll be frank, I think it's very challenging to mix students and dogs, but I also appreciate the fact that in certain parts of the city, there isn't a lot of green space. So, this is us exploring a potential relationship, but it's still very early days. And we would want to look at, like I said in the report, things like, funding, design standards, maintenance, liability, all of those things we would need to take into consideration when you're in, you're going to bring dogs onto the property when you have students nearby.
And team, I find dogs to be adorable, so please don't get me wrong, but why are we spending time on this? How does this help with our education of children?
Thank you, and through the chair. I think what we feel in the city, what we're seeing in the city of Toronto is that there's an increasing pressure point with dogs, and our parks, our school grounds are considered in the community as parks. There's really, like, it's the neighborhood park. It's the neighborhood place to go. And, we've never really discouraged that. I mean, our schoolyards don't tend to be locked down at the end of the day. You can come on the site, you can walk around. So I think when this came forward, there was this idea of, like, how do we address this increasing problem? And it's made worse. It has been made worse, as I said, by the pandemic, increased dog ownership and increased density in the city. I see their Associate Director Zucker has something she also might want to add.
I just wanted to respond to Trustee Lee to say this was a board resolution. That's why it's back here.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. When did this board resolution come through? Sorry, did I miss it somehow?
2019.
Okay. Well, I was elected, but I probably didn't know what was happening at the time. So, thank you for that information. Team, I would just say that I appreciate the fact this is a board resolution, but I feel like, given everything that we know, given how heavy our staff workload is, and given, how much things we absolutely have to get done for our students, in my opinion, I don't feel like, I hope staff doesn't spend too much time working on this, simply because, our schools are designed for children to be educated, and they're also designed to keep kids safe. I understand the city has a green space problem, but that is a city issue. I don't feel like our staff, at least I hope we haven't staffed our departments to take on city social issues with regarding to park space. And I just hope that we don't overwork our staff to on something that is absolutely not within our jurisdiction. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. Vice Chair Didapides.
Thank you. And just a couple of comments. First one, not very distant from what Trustee Lee was saying. It's a real difficulty in having dogs playing around children. And then the folks that are with the dogs and the folks that are with the children often don't like that mixture. So that's always a difficult mix. I'm going to say a couple of things about the process. Obviously this comes from motion, and it comes from a real issue in school communities. We're embedded into larger communities, so the issue is real. The closer you are to the core of the city, the less green space you have, and the more important the issue is. As a suburban trustee, I don't face some of the same pressures in the same way, but you still feel it, and there's been newspaper stories and so on. So this is a thing that we have to tackle with because we're part of that community. All that being said, having gone through the process to try and get a couple parks approved, I would think that most of our school properties, if to be honest, not all of them, wouldn't meet the criteria as I understand the criteria. In terms of what we could do in 1995, say, to build the doggy park, you just need some fencing. What we need to do now is take a look at the acreage, take a look at the water runoff, create a system to clean that water and get rid of all the urine pollution that would create, and a number of different factors. It becomes really complicated. You can't be close to creeks and rivers and a number of other things, it becomes a really difficult thing to actually find acceptable spaces. And then on top of that, you're taking away green space from children, because the uses are not compatible. You can't just have part of the space be used part of the time, and then the children have them use it the rest of the time. So not sure that the uses are compatible. All that being said, I think from the questions of some of my other trustees, there are issues around safety, their reporting, and how we deal with all that. And I think being able to come back with more information about how some of that process works would be really significant and really helpful. So it's a real problem. We'll have to deal with it, but I'm hesitant to think that we'll be able to see pilots put in place with the expense in resources and the difficulty in getting through some of those thresholds, keeping in mind our businesses creating spaces for children. So those are my comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Didavides. Trustee Hastings.
Thank you for allowing my questions. As a person that owns a dog, a really large dog, I'm going to suggest, because there, as Trustee Didavides has stated, not all schoolyards are suitable to have your furry, four-legged friends running around. So I'm going to suggest that the schoolyards that are absolutely not suitable be marked, signed, no dogs. You're going to have to do that because otherwise you're going to have, again, 583, you're saying 583 schools? 583 schools and going, that's a problem. And not all of those schools are suitable. They're not suitable for the wildlife that comes running through there, and there's quite a bit of that running through. So what you're going to be doing is taking your schools and you're going to be signing them. No dogs if they're not suitable. And that should take away your problem because you'll be able to spot what is or what is not supposed to be there, and you'll be able to go over and ticket it. I've seen that because we do have 311 enforcement officers running around. Not as many as you think, but they're there. They're running around, and they do ticket. So I'm going to suggest, and I realize there's no I in team, sign the properties where there are no dogs possible. No dog. Thank you for allowing me to talk.
Thank you, Trustee Hastings. We have Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and through the chair. First, I should share I'm pro dog, and I have a 100-pound Bernese Mountain Dog, so I want to get that out of the way before we start with this. And as it pertains to all the conversations about 3-on-1, I think we or at least I learned today through the city's budget process that we want to encourage them to be using the online app instead of calling, which is anywhere from 10 to 100 times more expensive for the city to deal. So when we get around to doing that, the app would be a better way to go for us tax-paying Toronto citizens. All of that being said, I'm interested in, I'm fully aware that a lot of our colleagues in the inner city have, very challenging, geographically small footprints for their schools to be on. But in my ward, for example, that in central Etobicoke, that's not the case. And since doing this, I've been thinking about, some of my sites, and even though quite large, wouldn't really be set up well to have a dog run on them. But I do have some sites that just were given, the lay of the lot that we own and the way the school operates, that there were sections that you could actually, if you were so inclined, to fence off that wouldn't create a particular, in and itself, a challenge to the day-to-day operations of the school. So in a perfect world, assuming we find agreement with this, is it our position that fundamentally we will supply the space and that as long as the city runs these spaces and assumes fundamentally all the costs associated with it? Or are we talking about severing our sites and selling them to this, any designated to the city? Or would these be like city-owned, like would our caretaking staff maintain them? Or would the city's maintenance departments be responsible for doing them? And then I'll close with the practical sense of even on the lots where I see this potentially conceivably working, you get into issues about, parking and our school zones that for drop off and pick up. This works great on a Sunday afternoon when we're not operational and things like that. But when you start getting around, we've got major concerns at all of our schools around drop off and pick up, and the concept that we would be introducing more cars to this environment, is a challenge for me. So there's a lot there, but I thank you for your indulgence.
So thank you, Trustee McLean. I think those are many of the questions that we have with if we were to engage in any kind of opportunities with the city. I don't think we are looking to sell land, so that's a very complicated process, and I don't think the city is actually in a position to do that. It would be more of what kind of an agreement can we strike, right? If all the other conditions, if everything was favorable, what could we come up with? Before I reference the Section 37 monies that we receive. So, when we receive when we used to receive Section 37 money that the city would put towards a play structure or, any kind of site improvement, the idea was that it would then be available it would be community use for a certain amount of years, 10 years, 12 years, 20 years, that kind of thing. That might be the same kind of model that we follow with this, but you've raised some really important questions, and that's one of our concerns about dog run parks on school board sites is, how do you manage them? How do you address people driving there when the schools operate? All those questions that you've raised, I think we would have to look at, but in our discussions, preliminary discussions with TLC, we never thought about that we would sell land to the city for a dog park.
Just to follow up, if I may, through the chair, thank you. The playgrounds is an interesting, but it was a quid pro quo thing. Like they were giving us something that we were of value to us that, so in exchange, 10, 12, 15, whatever, we would be interested in making, the community would gain advantage as well. I'm having a hard time finding the quid in this exercise that, what we get for this, for doing this other than, and I appreciate that we have responsibility to be good community, like where we have big places in our, our properties are considered shared space and very valuable to our communities. So I do think we have a greater sense that we should, participate in these kinds of discussions. But this sounds really tricky to me. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. Trustee Erhard.
Thanks so much. I logged on in particular to check in on this item, and so thank you so much for this. I just wanted to add my 2 cents of strong encouragement to continue to dialogue with the city and see if for some of in some specific geographies, if there may be opportunities to come up with some creative ideas. And so while I know that there may be no one size fits all for our whole board or the whole city, my observation just being a year as a trustee is that it would contribute to student learning and well-being in some site-specific geographies to have solutions that would better separate dogs from students, and that absent action, dogs will continue to interact with students either during school hours or outside of school hours, and that for those young people can affect their well-being. Not that dogs affect kids' well-being in a negative way all the time, but that it infringes upon their ability to make use of the full yard. And at least in my community, there were incidents of injuries. And so when there is an injury, it's certainly very grounding in terms of wanting our schools to be as safe as possible all hours of the day. And I recognize that this is just reading in the report. I appreciated having the information about the security time that is spent on this. And on that basis alone, I think there's merit in some places in thinking what could we do. And so just in terms of the question of why are we doing this, I think there is merit in using some time to think about what could be done on this in certain site-specific geographies. So I hope the dialogue continues, and I'm happy to play a role in that dialogue over time if it would be helpful to do so. And just thank you again.
Thank you, Trustee Ahad. Trustee Laskin, you're next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just some history here. When I made this motion for a pilot for a dog park, it was specific to my experience at 529 Vaughan Road, where the site had been closed. So the community was using the school grounds as their dog park. We began to have children there when a school was relocated, and it became very difficult for the community to understand they could no longer run rampant with their animals on the field that interacted with kids. So it was very specific at the time. I appreciate the fact that it has expanded over the years and the city is now looking at it. But to be crystal clear, it started because it does not matter, Trustee Hastings, that signs are in every single schoolyard. In fact, multiple signs are in every single schoolyard, and still community brings their dogs in, and they bring them in when children are playing. They're not on leashes. They run around, they interact, they cause harm, and it's a significant issue. And not only is it a staff hour and a caretaker issue, it's a wear and tear issue on our school grounds too. So it is a problem that has no solution, because signage, obviously, not all dog owners are like my trustee colleagues who are responsible and respectful and only let their dogs go in appropriate places. But it is a never-ending issue in some communities, and very problematic. So anything we can do, which is why I really do think the 311, the signage, the app, all of that, and even frankly on the front page of our website, we add the no dogs and here's what you do if dogs are on school grounds. So the more we can communicate that it's not allowed under any circumstances. The motion was to see if a pilot dog park in a certain location would actually stop the issue. That was the original thinking. It has really expanded, and I'm happy it has, that the city is dealing with it. But to my colleague's point, I don't want staff. This is obviously not a priority. The motion was made, 4.5 years ago. It's now coming. It's still not a priority. We have to wait until the city reports. But what is a priority is the safety of kids and community on our school grounds. And that is a priority. And having dogs run through school grounds when kids are playing is just not acceptable. But that is the reality of what we're dealing with. So I just wanted to provide that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Trustee Dawson?
Thank you through the chair. I basically was going to say what Trustee Laskin said. You know, it is a huge problem. It is a safety issue. I disagree that it is not something that should have time spent on it, although I do appreciate the need to wait for the city's study to be completed. But just to share with trustees, I mean, last year I had a kid at one of my schools essentially get his face bitten off. So he was approached by a dog that latched onto his face, and he needed multiple reconstructive surgeries and still does. It has impacted his life forever. And there are situations like that that have happened in other wards as well. You know, people are scared for their children's safety during school hours. And I can appreciate that it's not a city-wide issue as much as, you know, for everybody, as much as it might be for me. Davenport is the most green space compromised part of the city, and Spadina and Fort York does not have enough green space to serve its explosive population. So, you know, this is a big issue for me, and I'm happy with the work that's being done with the city. I really greatly appreciate it to the staff. I know you all have a lot on your plate, but this is really an important issue that needs to be addressed for the safety of our students during school hours and outside of school hours. But, you know, primarily during school hours, this is a major issue for me. So I just wanted to bring that to light. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson. And I have a few comments or clarification questions. Can I go ahead?
Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I know safety and liability is the biggest concern. As a chair of AFPAC and person who has sat on finance committee for very long, my biggest concern is the financial cost. And that is the biggest concern I have, because as Trustee McLean said, that what are we doing? Are we giving up our space? The securities, are we able to hire not 583 security guards, but at least if I make it half, it might come to 260. So financial cost is the biggest concern to me. And I don't want this to be uploaded on us, right? Though we all are partners, but I really don't want this pilot project or anything uploaded on us, since we are struggling with finance already. So this is my concern, and I really request to staff to look into this, that how much financial it's going to cost us, right? Because for us, it's all about finance, safety, definitely liability. It's the biggest challenge, like Trustee Dawson said, right? So please make sure these items are covered, and thank you for the report. Thank you, Chair.
I'll pass the chair back.
Thank you, Chair. Anybody else?
I'd like to move it, Mr. Chair. It's Shelley.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Moved by Trustee Laskin. Anybody wants to second? Vice Chair Diabetes. And can we open the vote?
Stand in favor.
Trustee Shan.
Stand in favor.
And it carried. Moving along, final item.
Before we do that, if it's okay, I just would like, we have a guest in the audience, and they've been very well behaved the entire night. So I just wanted to thank him for sharing the time today with us.
Thank you.
That's okay, Ted. You'd be murdered if you went home and you were behaving badly. You did wonderfully well there.
Thank you, staff, for the incredible report and your hard work. And I really appreciate on behalf of the committee. Final item, it's adjournment.
Thank you.
May I have a mover and seconder for this? Trustee McLean. And who's going to second this?
Laskin.
Trustee Laskin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Drive safe home.
Thank you. Good night.